Is the Bridges project, with its 2 new bridges and its redone Kennedy interchange, is that the best thing for Louisville? What do the residents want? Do they want reduced congestion or more grass and trees? How will the rise in gas prices affect traffic patterns over the next 20 years? I don't know. But I think a lot of the justifications put forth for the project by its supporters do make a lot of sense. I think they're valid. Reduced congestion, improved safety, improved cross-river mobility, and room for growth. The one thing I don't think is an issue is the cost. Now, I have to stop for a moment and say that every time I hear someone talk about the cost of the Bridges project or I read about it, the number seems to be different every single time. There are a few reasons for that. First, the cost can be expressed in a combined Indiana-Kentucky total, or it can be expressed in just one state's portion of it. The project costs are divided based on what part of the project it is. For example, the approaches to the bridge are paid for by the state in which that approach is going to be constructed. The Kennedy interchange is going to be all Kentucky. And I think the bridges are half and half. The overall split is 78% Kentucky, no, 72% Kentucky, sorry, and 28% Indiana. The other reason the number kind of jumps around quite a bit is that it can be expressed as a static 1 year total. Here's what it would cost if we built it in 1 year, versus a summary or a summation of construction year costs with an inflation factor added to that. That's probably the more accurate way to go, because we're not going to build it in 1 year. We're going to build it in, I don't know, 18 or 19 or 20 years. And the cost of goods and services goes up every year. The other reason the costs seem to change quite a bit is because they're going up. And as for that cost, the cost as expressed in 2003 static year dollars is a little bit more than $2 billion. But if you change over to that year of expenditure, and again, there's an inflation adjustment in there, there are also contingency costs built in and all kinds of stuff, it jumps to over $4 billion. And that's about $2.9 billion for Kentucky and $1.1 billion for Indiana. And I think that adds up to $4 billion. Now, that is a huge amount of money. What I would like to add is that the states take in a huge amount of money. This document, it was prepared by the Transportation Cabinet late last year, and it's basically a summary of the money that goes in, the money that goes out. For starters, every time you buy a gallon of gas in Kentucky, you're paying 19.7 cents. If you are driving a truck, you are paying that plus a surtax. When you buy a car, you pay a motor vehicle usage tax. The feds have their share. Every time you buy a gallon of gas in Kentucky, you're paying 18.4 cents per gallon. And that federal tax money is redistributed about every 6 years through a transportation bill. It's basically a gigantic pork fest. The most recent transportation bill, pork fest, I think that was last year, and for 2007 through 2012, Kentucky was slated to get about $3.8 billion. Now, if you take your federal resources and your state resources, you can put together about $5.3 billion for a 6-year period. If you, sticking with this $5.3 billion, if you extend that throughout the life of the project, if you play what if and assume you're going to get the same level of money from here until 2024 or whenever it is, that gives you almost $16 billion. If you divide that number by the number of years in the project, you get about $883 million. That is plenty of money to cover the annual construction costs of the Bridges project. In fact, the Bridges project has submitted an initial financial plan to the feds. And what they say in here is that during peak construction years, which if everything goes right is 2011, 2012, and 2013, it will eat up about 32% of the state's transportation resources for a highway project. Keeping in mind that that already takes off the table funds that cannot be used for interstate highway projects. For example, that fuel fund. Half of that fuel fund goes towards municipal and rural roads. And I said 32%, that's just for the peak years. The average impact will be 14%. That is doable. And I don't think that justifies carping from Frankfurt that this project is too expensive. All it means is that some legislator is not going to get his road to nowhere built quite as soon as he'd like. I also don't think it justifies a public-private partnership, which is a euphemism for toll roads. I used to live in northern Illinois, and northern Illinois had tons of tolls. Funny thing is, the roads are paid for, but the tolls are still there, and they keep on increasing. I also noticed that the Illinois Toll Authority, generally speaking, was a haven for friends of politicians. It seemed to be just one more goodie, a job there could be one more goodie that an elected official could hand out to a big contributor. Now, just because something happens in Illinois doesn't mean it happens to happen in Kentucky. But once an elected official gets hold of a steady, almost guaranteed revenue stream, it becomes a little hard for them to let go. I think that's going to be particularly the case since most toll roads now are built using transponder technology. You don't have to sit there for 10 minutes waiting to put your 2 cents in the bucket.